86.
86, that's, I'm looking at the right.
A year past my goal.
I don't actually see the red light.
I don't see a red light either. Do you see a red light?
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with our Planning Commission meeting tonight. Grateful that you could be here and look forward to hearing from some of you hopefully tonight as we go through our agenda. We'll start tonight by a Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd please rise and join with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'd like to begin tonight, as we typically do, with a legislative thought or prayer, and we'll ask Commissioner Shaylin Heyman to offer that tonight.
Thank you, Chair Hershey. I would like to start off tonight with both a thought and a prayer. And as a thought, normally I try to find fun quotes, very pithy quotes from important people like Jimi Hendrix. Today though, I'm inspired by a conversation that I had with one of my colleagues at work who is on a rules committee for the judicial profession. And he had commented to me how wonderful it was to have a number of people come together from different backgrounds and different practice areas, and to be able to debate rules in a respectful way, and that even though everyone didn't agree, everyone was able to do that respectfully. And it immediately brought to mind this planning commission for me, because I think that my fellow planning commissioners, everyone brings something different to the table, but I have always felt like no matter whether we agree or disagree, and we do disagree occasionally, that everyone on this commission does so respectfully, and that I feel like our planning commission is much stronger because of that. So I want to say thank you to all of my fellow commissioners.
Thank you.
And I would like to share this go around. This one is a Buddhist prayer for peace. We pray for eternal harmony in the universe. May the weather be seasonable, may the harvest be fruitful, may countries exist in harmony, and may all people enjoy happiness.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We'll start tonight by reviewing our minutes from the meeting held on June 28th, 2017. Commissioners have received these minutes in their packets today, and we'll just go through page by page. If there are any changes, if you could please let us know, and we'll make appropriate amendments if necessary. Page 1.
I have one question on page 1. Did we do the minutes before Commissioner Johnson was appointed the chair pro temp, or did he do that first? I thought he did that right off the bat. So
That's kind of my recollection as well.
Yeah, maybe we can just switch those two paragraphs.
Yeah, I think switch those.
I have a question about that, because I feel like sometimes things are sort of placed sort of to summarize and not the exact same order. Is that a huge deal, or?
No.
Well, typically things should be in the order that they were
that
discussed.
they're
Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Because I've noticed, I had to go back today and look at a few things. I noticed some things that were just, someone responded before the other person, and I didn't know if that was a big deal.
Oh, you mean in the text itself?
In the meeting minutes, like it'll say, like someone will ask a question and then maybe someone else will respond, and then another person will respond in a different way. But I just didn't know if it was supposed to be in the order that it specifically came, or just to summarize.
Yeah, the purpose of the minutes is to be able to relate to any decision. So I don't see that the minutes are a detailed transcript. I know you don't either.
Great.
I don't think it's important to worry about how little items are discussed and who said what in that order. I think it's important to capture what was discussed, what was the point being made, and then move on, because the minutes from this, there's a couple of balancing. We want a good record,
right?
But we also have budgetary issues and constraints that are associated with the minutes, and we're trying to balance that. Minutes should summarize the action, capture the essence of your discussion,
Okay.
but I wouldn't focus on the detailed parts of the discussion unless a particular point is being made to clarify a decision or a finding.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, so.
Okay, good points both. Anything else on page 1? Page 2, I have just a comment on line 8, and there are a couple of other places that this occurred too. We generally speak in the past tense in all of the minutes, and so when we say applicant William Davies says, staff explained the issue very well. I think the word should be said, just to be consistent with the grammar of the rest of the minutes. That's all I had on page 2.
On page 2, line 16, I just think it's important that we include any kind of reasoning for why we make a motion or discussion. And I wrote this up because I never write it up, and I always feel so dumb when I try to say this, so I finally wrote it up for you. But I said, Commissioner Wright stated this was a fairly simple and straightforward request because the current lot doesn't meet AL development standards and it is surrounded by RL, and she feels amenable to granting the request to let the owner utilize their land. And then I made the motion. So I just went back and listened to that so that we knew, you know, there's no discussion, no public hearing, and then all of a sudden we make a motion. I think it's just important to know the reasoning behind there, so.
Did you get that
just
okay,
on
Luann,
line
or would you
21.
like her to provide you
I
a
will
copy?
email this to you, because I have some more.
Just
Fair
on line
warning.
21, I thought it should say the motion as amended passed unanimously.
Okay.
Good point, Kathy. Thank you.
Well, it says the amended motion passed, right?
It was the amended motion. The amended motion passed unanimously.
Yeah, that's what it says.
Well, then it just said the overall motion
Yeah.
passed
Oh, you're saying at the
unanimously.
end
At
of the
the
line.
end.
The,
At
the
the
last
end of
sentence, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The amended.
Oh, let's
Well,
see.
the line,
The
so the
motion-
sentence before,
The motion to amend passed
Passed.
unanimously.
That's true also.
and then the overall amended motion passed unanimously.
There you go.
Yeah.
That makes more sense. That makes more sense, yeah.
Okay.
I noticed on page 2, line 20, I am referred to as Commissioner Johnson, yet in other areas like page 2, line 8, I'm referred to as Chair Pro Tem Johnson. So I thought, maybe Lisa, if I got this right, just to be consistent, every time it says Commissioner Johnson, change that to Chair Pro Tem. I found that on page 220, page 312, 326, and 818, and I'll give you a list of those after.
Okay. Anything else on page 2? Page 3, I have one comment on line 10. And you need to start before then. The Porter Lane, starting on line 9, the Porter Lane storm drain system, comma, and drain lines by Les Schwab. That sentence seemed a little awkward to me. I guess we meant to say there, and drain lines located near the Les Schwab property. Anything else on page 3?
I have one, again, this is just to sort of clarify why we were discussing certain things. Page 3, line 19. My question, Commissioner Wright questioned whether the lot width frontage would be enough to not be treated as a flag lot, which is prohibited. And then, I'm not sure that we necessarily need this, but I thought it was important to put in the difference between flag lots and flag shapes. So I have this written up that what Corey said, flag lots have a stem which cannot meet the frontage requirements, and those lots are currently prohibited. Flag shapes are encouraged to allow flexibility and placement of structures as long as they have the street frontage width. And I'll give that to you.
Well, I'm not sure flag is encouraged.
Yeah, it is, actually, in our gross density, it's encouraged.
A flag,
Flag
Shape.
shape.
Not a flag lot.
So he's talked, because I think it's important to know that there's a delineation between the flag lots and the flag-shaped lots. And we could even say flag-shaped lots, if that's more clear, Corey. I mean, you can just decide.
Flag lots and flag-shaped lots.
Yeah, the idea of just a shape real quick, so you know, is just the idea that you have street, but you may have deep properties. And you can there, as long as they have the
Utilize those.
frontage, you can create an estate lot behind
Right,
if you want, in order to maximize use of property.
right.
I know that that might run a little uncomfortable for folks who are uncomfortable with flag lots, but gross density is designed to be flexible.
Could
that
we
way.
say, well, that the flag shape is permitted? Because really our ordinances want perpendicular lines.
Yeah, let's say
I-
instead of
I-
encouraged, he said encouraged, but we
Oh,
could say
did-
flag-shaped lots are permitted to allow flexibility.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
wanna do that?
The ordinances allow to waiver from the straight cookie cutter style based on the layout of the land.
Okay, because I thought that was useful for me, I know, in the discussion. So I just thought it would be useful to, again, for decision-making.
Okay. Anything else on page 3? Page 4?
I have one on line 2 that the sentence was, where it starts with Commissioner Wright, was really kind of long, and so I just reworked it. Commissioner Wright asked staff for direction on what powers the commissioners have when considering a zone map amendment to mandate something like that. So just cut out a bunch of middle stuff. And then line 9 and 10, I have 2. On line 9, he said inclusionary zoning, and then he actually used it as a tool, and I think that's important that we know that it's a tool that we have. So I just wanted to add, is the tool an appropriate term right there? And then on line 10, that's when I questioned whether we should proactively plan, and he responded. So I wanted to add in, Commissioner Wright questioned whether in our desire to proactively plan, this was the sort of thing we should address before these types of requests come before the commission. And then there was a whole discussion, we don't have to put it in there, but it talked about early attempts to have a discussion on infill and flag lots, but suggested reintroducing the topic to the city council. So we could leave that as is, but we could also add in.
You could add in something, Mr. Snyder briefed the commission in past discussions about infill.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Any issues by the commissioners with any of that? Anything else on page 4? Well, actually, I have one on page 4. On line 24, there's a typo. You've got 2 apostrophes with units. Mr. Snyder, in the city building code for multifamily units addresses, or maybe it's S apostrophe, since it's plural apparently.
Units
Okay.
addresses. Wait. No, Mr. Snyder.
Oh, wait a minute.
Building code for multifamily
Addresses
units.
unit.
No apostrophe.
No, actually, now that I read it, I think we're talking about,
It's just
it-
plural.
yeah,
Multifamily units.
the city building code for multi,
No apostrophe at all.
maybe, maybe a better word than addresses. I think that's confusing. Code for multifamily units.
Regulate compliance with ADA.
Yeah,
Or
But unit,
Regulate.
multifamily unit addresses.
deals with compliance with ADA.
Yeah, that'd work.
Sure.
So no apostrophe. Anything else on page 4? Page 5, again, line 11, change the word says to said.
And then at the very end of line 13, just including the words without mandating it. Because we had already talked about whether or not we could mandate. And then I asked if there's anything else we could do without mandating it, so.
And I'd like to make a suggestion on line 17. It says, Mr. Snyder agreed with City Attorney Romney's comments and said, you, I believe by you mean the commission.
Correct.
And
Said the
so
commission
change the
could
word
also-
you to the commission.
And then I have another addition on line 22. Just through our deliberations, Corey reminded us that we have a tool where we can initiate a rezone. And again, that was part of the reason why I felt a little bit more comfortable with it as well. And so I think we should probably add that in. And I have this written, Mr. Snyder reminded the commission that this is a petition driven by the property owner, but the council or the commission have the authority to initiate a rezone as a tool when the need for a rezone is there. The city would then initiate that application.
Any issue with that change? Okay. Anything else on page 5?
Yeah, on line 45, beginning with street to walk from the Performing Arts Center, I think that specifically was mentioned to restaurants in the area. Somebody else did bring up parking spaces at Colonial Lumber too, but I'd like the restaurants noted just because that's actually crossing in front of the Quick Quack. So.
Okay. So 2 restaurants in the area and to utilize parking spaces, right? Any problems with that change? Okay. Anything else on page 5? Page 6?
I have one, it's just a preference, but line 43, 44, on the finding, on the second line it says, due to the finding of significant visual presence on Parish Lane, and I would like that to say from Parish Lane, because it isn't actually on, and the same thing on the next page, line 4. Change on to from.
Which line was that on page 7?
Page 7 is line 4. Significant visual presence from Parish Lane.
Okay. Any issues with that change? Anything else on page 6? In addition to the change on page 7, anything else on page 7?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the code. So the language actually says on that significant visual presence that it has a significant visual presence on Parish Lane. So that's the finding you have to make.
Okay.
Would be on.
So I think it's trying to say that when you're on Parish Lane, you can see it.
Yeah, that's why I changed it to from, because
Yeah.
it's not.
I guess you could
actually
change it
on
from,
Parish Lane.
but the code,
Well, I'm okay with that.
I
if
would
we have to
stick with the code, don't you think?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so. You okay with that, Kat?
I'm okay with it. I just thought that was a clarification since this obviously isn't on Parish Lane.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Let's see, so are we leaving that as
We'll
on?
leave it as on.
On both of those?
Yes. Okay, anything else on page 7? Page 8? Okay, thank you for your comments. Chair will entertain a motion on the minutes.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of June 28th, 2017 as amended.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would just note that I abstain because I did not participate in this meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, next matter of business is scheduled for a public hearing. It's a zoning text amendment dealing with construction, sales, and services definition and uses. It's a legislative decision where we'll consider the proposed zoning text amendment for CZC 12.12 definitions, CZC 12.34 commercial zones, and 12.36 Table of Uses, all regarding the definition, use, and parameters of a, quote, construction, sales, and service, end quote, in commercial zones and the associated allowance for outdoor storage yards. That rather long introduction, I will turn the matter over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, as you may recall, a couple of meetings ago, we had to make sure we got back out to publication because we were changing some other elements of the zoning code. So we're bringing this back to you at your request. You asked staff to go back and look at the construction, sales, and service use and see if there was a way to create a limited edition or something of that nature for the idea of allowing in some limited fashion these types of uses on our Main Street, in the South Main Street corridor. Just as a way of reminder, the construction, sales, and service definition was fairly broad. It was the idea that your home improvement, lumber yards, contractors, equipment, storage yards, and so forth were considered construction, sales, and service. And the city is the petitioner on this and would like to potentially allow an opportunity for a contractor's office to occupy sell some city property, the old fire station, and allow a user to come into that facility and reuse it. In looking at it, you asked us to say, well, there is this tension between the broad definition, but maybe it could be pared down to something else. So we went ahead and followed your suggestion. It conveniently worked out that we have manufacturing general, and then we have manufacturing limited. We also have vehicle repair and sales and repair. We also have vehicle sales limited. We have printing general. We have printing limited. And so following the limited theme was from our view, the best approach. So what we did is created this new definition. It is narrowing it from the large type of lumberyard uses, and we've created this new definition. It still involves a retail or wholesale. We didn't change that. We did talk about now various small materials. So this is the idea, you don't have a large lumber yard. This is more of a niche, a plumbing store, things of that nature. But that's the associated, their materials, their supplies, their services, and the idea is that they're conducted, we added this language, in an enclosed building. Now the enclosed building is a normal requirement of any of our zones, unless an outdoor in some areas, unless an outdoor storage area is approved with the proper screening. So we start out always interior and then allow opportunities for outdoors, and I'll address that later, how we change it for the CM zone. But this one is in an enclosed building, and it goes to the point that it's not outdoor storage. So that's where the difference is beginning to change. There's no outdoor storage of large construction equipment or materials on a lot or parcel, other than obviously if they bid a construction site somewhere else in the city, they can ship those materials to that location direct from wherever they purchase it. And then you usually apply typical uses to try to give the idea of what you're talking about, but it's not limited to. So we go electrical, plumbing, air conditioning, heating supply stores, swimming pool contract sales and supplies. So this is not a place where you actually pick up the big fiberglass pool and install it in your backyard, but you can have a sales office, a showroom, floor, interior, and order that amenity for your land. And then we just talk about construction and trade contractors' offices. This is where corporate headquarters of businesses are allowed on Main Street. This one will allow the contractors' offices, but is without the big storage yard and equipment. And add that, because that's kind of been the driver of this particular change. As you recall, the outdoor storage is allowed in a lot of our different zones. In the particular case of this commercial medium zone, and once again, our commercial medium zone is only used right now in the South Main Street corridor. We haven't applied it anywhere else, but this essentially would be available to other areas to go to the CM. But for now, we're adding, well, the restriction is any outdoor storage that is approved has to be 50 feet away from the residential boundary. And that's across the board in any of the commercial zones. Due to this commercial medium being so small on Main Street, this comes in direct conflict with the design guidelines of the form-based code, where you're trying to push the buildings to the street, put the parking behind, so the temptation is going to always be put the storage yards closer to the residential in some fashion. And what we're saying is no, we're really serious. You have to do this inside. Whatever building you can build in your footprint, all of it is going to be stored inside. And this one takes away the idea that you can do any outdoor storage. So the 50 feet goes away with our current proposal if you passed it. We do give the exception. There are opportunities for temporary uses permits, Christmas tree sales, fireworks stands, produce sales. We didn't want to tap into that and say that's prohibited, because those are intermittent uses. And so we still wanted to allow that kind of use to have some outdoor storage, but the more permanent user is restricted from everyday use of outdoor storage. So that's significant. If you pass this draft, the outdoor storage for the permanent uses goes away in the CM zone. And then we go in and say, okay, this is a new use, so we need to go back into our table of uses, and as typical, once you arrive to a zone that's allowed, whether it's conditional or permitted, often it carries to the other zones unless there's a reason not to have it in the other zones. So we provided the table up to the CM. It's not construction, sales, and services not allowed. Once you go to CM, the permitted use category comes into play. Now, I think you still have discretion. Do you want it as a conditional use in the CM? Do you want to keep it as a permitted? In weighing that at a staff level, we know the tension between conditional uses. You've got to allow them unless there's a reason not to. And the idea is if we're just going to do the indoor storage and it's deemed acceptable, then let's just let them do it as a permitted use. Now that may or may not make you comfortable. Part of the reasoning why I just placed it at permitted use is in the form-based code, you're really not trying to focus on the types of uses. You're really just trying to say, build the building, the parking lots. In this case, you don't get outdoor storage. And that's what we're more worried about than what's the activities on the interior of the building. So I think you have to weigh that. Is there something else with this use that would need to be placed in a conditional use category for mitigation purposes? So I still think you have this openness. Push it to C, conditional use permits in the CM, or leave it as permitted as it's drafted. And then we repeat the findings from the past about allowing it. So hopefully we've at least provided the base minimum of discussion for you.
Okay, thank you. Questions for staff?
That looks awesome.
Corey, I have a quick question for you. And I believe this is a question maybe for anybody who would like to speak on this issue tonight. Let's say that theoretically there was a very unique building on Main Street, because we're not talking specifically about a particular lot here.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to say, as the whole general district, are we okay?
As the whole district. But theoretically, there's a unique building on Main Street that has really tall garage-type features and whatever else. What, besides this limited construction, sales, and service, what would be a reasonable use for a building like this if it's not for maybe a fire hydrant, a fire station? I can't speak. Yeah.
I think that's a creative, adaptive reuse question. If you just go with the simplicity that you have the framework of the building, what could it be used for? I would look at the theoretical Bay Area of this use as an assembly, so you could go into some type of assembly use. A good example is, a church use or something like that would be an adaptive reuse. You have I've seen a public safety building for the police department move from the fire station to the training office facility, replace the doors with glass, and use the third bay as where they bring in a person who's arrested in a secure facility and move them out. So, you know, there's some adaptive reuses where it could be turned into floor space. Example is construction, sales, and services. If you took the swimming pool facility and went into there, you could certainly display your spas and some other things inside the large showroom places. So that would be an adaptive reuse, you know, to it. Now, and that's spinning a positive way that there are some creative ways to reuse it. The negative term that I would view of it is, you know, here's where we have the balance between the idea of reformatting South Main Street corridor and adopting an urban form. And the goal of that more urban form is to move buildings to the street. And we've had lots of debate. How far is that? 2 feet? Is that 15 feet? It's been modified. And the struggle that you have is we don't want to worry about what's going on in the building, but at the same time, the more opportunities you have to reuse existing buildings, the less likely you're going to move towards the readaptation of Main Street. And so I think that's the interesting part is if what's used to classify is your certificate of occupancy. This is something that's probably not as easily explained because it doesn't sit entirely in the zoning code. What the zoning code says in the case of the Main Street is if you change the occupancy type, so you're not talking about just uses from office to another office or something, you're talking about an occupancy type. So an example would be is if you go from an office to an assembly use of a church, that is an entirely different building category under the building code, which requires a new certificate of occupancy because your assembly and the regulations are completely different than an office. In the zoning code, it says when you do that, when you change the category of the building permit for new certificate of occupancy, the non-conforming status is irrelevant. You now come in conformance of the new code. And so I think that's where the adaptive reuse is going to be problematic. Your question is what could the Bay Areas be used for? Well, if it was an adaptive reuse and went to assembly of a church can't use it as is because the assembly is an A occupancy, the fire station is a civil government service is a B occupancy. So the B occupancy now goes away and the church just can't go in and reuse the Bay Area. They would actually have to reformat the building, bring it out, and remodel the entire facility to meet our new Main Street codes. So in the case of that particular building, it's a B occupancy. It covers retail, it covers offices, it covers government facilities, which I always find is an odd category because a government facility with a ladder truck is very different than a corporate office of a business. But unfortunately, that's in the same category. But conversion to a church, it wouldn't be beneficial even though it could be a big assembly area. So I think the other key into here is anybody who goes back into the Main Street area not only has to think about the building and its shape, they have to also, in the zoning, they also have to think about does it change the building code category because it might be a good adaptive use, but it might kick it over to the new standards anyway. So it's not an easy, you know, that's the tension between saying, hey, we want you to move to this new framework. And the more we glean away from that more framework, the less likely we're going to get that framework. And then you have the tension as well. Is it good to let buildings sit for 20 years until the price deteriorates and makes it worth value for demolition? So tough call. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you. Other questions for staff? Along those lines, with regard to the particular use that we are looking at tonight, and again, not to lose sight of the overall impact it would have along all of Main Street, but this is clearly a change of use. Are we looking at that same situation here?
It's a change of use under the zoning, but it's not a change of use into the occupancy. The
Okay.
government service is a B.
So we don't have a change of use.
Yeah,
under
the government
occupancy.
service is a B, which is the oddity, I think, in this classification.
Okay.
And the business, in this case, construction, sales, and services,
also a B.
remains a B.
Okay, good. Good to have that clarification. Any other questions, comments for staff? Well, this matter has been scheduled, well, first of all, let's hear from the applicant, if the applicant would like to come forward and say anything at this time.
Good evening.
Hi, if you'd state your name for the record, please.
Of course. My name is Shane Shoup.
Shane, welcome. Any questions for, or any comments on the staff report that you have on?
No, I think they've done a marvelous job, and I think he's made some very good points. Mr. Schneider, we're grateful for the amendments that you've proposed, and we feel the same way in regards to the overall plan of the zone. We don't have plans to remodel and spend $1 million in upgrades right out the gate. But I think over time there will be some development plans with that lot. But starting out, going small, moving into the building is our main goal.
Okay. Questions for the applicant? So, as you've reviewed these amendments, these changes, you feel comfortable that the proposed use that you have, or at least have expressed for this property, will meet these guidelines? Any issues at all that you foresee?
The only, I guess, question that I would have is large equipment, as it is stated there, not to be kept on site. That can range, right? Somebody may say, you know, a 4x4 box is a large piece of equipment. Is there a certain guideline that we need to follow in that realm or that sphere, or is it anything bigger than a piece of garbage?
But it would be enclosed?
The only thing that I could think of, for instance, is we do have some equipment, lifts, that we use on certain projects. Most of our equipment we keep at a storage facility in another city. But occasionally, you know, it ends up on site overnight at our office. So if that would be an issue, then we just need to be aware of it and steer clear of it.
Yeah, our view of the structure of the ordinance, and if there's unclarity, we can take a shot at it. Everything is inside. And the idea is that if you have some delivery trucks or something of that nature that are normal trucks, they're stored inside the bay areas in this particular case, but that's our expectation. The idea is that there is no outdoor storage. Okay. So your lifts, scissor lifts, all of those kind of things would all be stored inside, but what would be the large equipment that's not even stored inside is cranes, D9 cats, bulldozers, things like that. We don't even expect that to be stored in this enclosed facility.
Okay. So vehicles I saw are permitted.
Yeah, the typical breakdown of large equipment is anything over a 1-ton truck.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I don't think I have any other questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This matter's been scheduled for a public hearing. Would invite any members of the public who may wish to speak on this matter to come forward at this time. You can come to either mic and state your name. And seeing no one.
Mr. Chair, I was seeing none, but before, I did email you two emails, one from Nancy Smith, one I believe from Robin Neville. Hopefully you received that. They called me this afternoon and said they were not able to make the meeting, but wanted to make sure you received that email from them. And if you had any questions, I maybe try to answer them. I can't speak for them, but
I can speak for myself. I can't speak for the other commissioners. I did receive them. and I have no problem putting them in the public record, and would move that we do that at this time. Any opposed? So we'll include those in the public record. Personally, I think that that most of the comments, or many of the comments that were made in the letters, have been dealt with to some extent, or at least maybe fully, by the changes that are being proposed here. But we could open that up for discussion by the commissioners, but if there's no one that wishes to come forward and speak at this time on this matter, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. So, commissioners, thoughts on staff report, the applicant's presentation, or the materials we received from the public by email?
Yeah, one thing that I thought was really interesting in the public comment, particularly from Nancy Smith, was her discussion about enforcement issues. Corey, I don't know if you'd like to comment on that a little bit. I think that is a problem often with zoning code and uses, is sometimes things can start one thing and kind of bleed into another, and enforcement can be a challenge because sometimes I think it happens by complaint, and that can be a challenge to make happen. And I know that the city's resources as far as policing all the uses and making sure everyone's in conformity, obviously, you know, we don't have that kind of resources. But that was one thing that I thought was a challenge. The thought that I think I understood from the public comment was get ahead of that by not allowing any of these uses or anything that could bleed into a noxious use. I don't know if I personally can support removing other properties' rights to do something I think is reasonable to prevent something that could be unreasonable. But, and I don't know if you want to comment on that, Corey, or any other commissioners. Generally, the enforcement issue is a challenge. Corey, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I had this discussion with Ms. Smith on the issue, and again, it's my take on the conversation. You know, my take on the conversation was I was asked specifically about enforcement, the example of the auto dealership that's associated and has created past anxiety about uses on Main Street. I think the point being made that I understood is you have vehicle sales in this case that created the problem, and it's a limited, you know, vehicle sales. They go to the yard, have the auction, come back, bring in the cars, detail them, fix some minor dents. And what was happening during that time is, you know, how much of that is accessory uses? The original conditional use permit says, yes, you can have vehicle sales and here's your delivery times, and that's about all that it said. You know, does that mean now that they can wash the engines out in the yard? Does that mean they can do some minor dent work? Does that mean they can repair and replace batteries, valves, transmissions? You know, what constitutes an accessory use? And I think that's where, you know, in general, I think that's always a struggle. You know, what constitutes accessory uses to a business? Because the accessory uses in all your chapters say accessory uses are allowed and there's parameters. If it's called out on the use list, then it's subject to whatever that use list also requires. Because sometimes you have partner uses that they call accessory, but they're really just another main use on the property and subject to normal review procedures. But it'll say such as, and you know, residential such as swing sets, pools, da-da-da, yada, yada. You know, when does an accessory use go? And so an example of construction sales and service, just to, this I didn't have a discussion, I'm flying on the seat of my pants, lack of better terms right now. You know, they come in and have a lift and it needs some services and under warranty, and a repair warranty comes out into the yard, fixes the lift, lubricates it, replaces an electric motor, whatever needs to be done. Is that, you know, is that an accessory use to the construction sales and service? I think that's the tension that you, but I think you have that in almost every use category in general. You know, one person's view of what's accessory to their business may be a different view of what's accessory to the use list on the city. And so now you enter the enforcement. And I think that's important. You know, one, in when you understand and try to write a definition, but you're not going to cover all the parameters. Two, if you get a sensitive use, that's why you use the CUP's process, so you can explore those accessory uses with the user and place time, place, and manner restrictions on it. And so I think that's the debate about if you want to move this direction, is it a permitted, and are you comfortable with it permitted, or is there potential for accessory uses that would need a little bit more exploration and use the CUP process to do that? Enforcement, you know, we're a small community. It is primarily, the policy is life safety is immediate. Anytime you have a life safety, that's very important. So there's no waiting around. If it's noticed or somebody reports it, it's immediate action for enforcement. The other types of enforcement are by complaint. And that's good and bad. That means that I'm not walking around the city looking for all kinds of opportunities to be Ticket Tom and make the community upset, so I bring 50 people to your meeting next time. But it's also the drawback, because we're a pretty good behavior community overall. So it's nice to have it by complaint, only when it really gets out of control. But at the same time, that's the angst of complaint basis, is that when people don't get along with each other, that's their favorite tool to run to beat each other up. Is, oh, I'll just complain on you. And then they complain on them, and then we go into the rounds of complaint against complaint. But I wouldn't worry about the enforcement from my standpoint. You know, it is what it is. But I do think the debate about, is this a permitted use or conditional use, should be part of your thought process.
Thank you. One thought occurred to me as I was looking at this and reading the public comment also is, you know, this commission has spent some time looking at Main Street, a lot of time looking at Main Street. We've come with various proposals for some aggressive, proactive planning along Main Street. Much of that has not been approved by the council or has otherwise not gone too far. On the other hand, I think that's still on our list of things that are important to us. But what we're left with really is a commercial strip still along Main Street. And since we have a commercial strip along Main Street, and that's all we have available to us right now, then I guess we do the best with what we've got. And I think that your efforts, Corey, and your staff, to come up with a definition that retains quite a bit of protection, I think, against some of the things that were raised by the public comment, while at the same time allowing commercial to continue to develop and thrive along Main Street, is a good compromise and a good solution. So I'm generally in favor of the proposal.
Enforcement was my concern, and that's what you expressed last meeting also. Mm-hmm. So with this, that it's pretty clear that that is not allowed. It's more comfortable to me. I mean, I like the idea of a showroom on Main Street. That seems kind of like a Main Street sort of thing. So if we can make that happen without creating any sort of industrial look to Main Street, it feels better to me.
You know, as I really loved the changes and suggestions that you made. I think it really did address a lot of the concerns we had last time we talked about this. But as I heard you speak again tonight, Corey, it made me think about the bigger picture of what we're doing, and if we truly believe in the Main Street plan. And if we do truly believe in the Main Street plan, then we want to encourage form-based code. And we want to encourage bringing these buildings to the street. Now, I don't know what we think as a commission right now. I know that we've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Corey, but form-based code and the Main Street plan as is, from what you've said again and again and again, is it works really well with mixed use. And we've heard from residents, they do not want mixed use. But what do we feel as citizen planners? Are we willing to say we want to hold out for this plan that we've created, or that was created before we're here, and that we believe in, to encourage this form-based code? And if we do, then saying yes to something like this is totally against the Main Street plan. So then we have to decide, okay, big picture, if we don't want to follow that form-based code, and if we don't want to, you know, make that something that continues forward, then right now, these types of decisions are undermining that Main Street plan that we have. And similarly, a lot of the residents that were unhappy with this Main Street plan are unhappy with this decision, which would not be in harmony with the Main Street plan, which is sort of ironic. But anyway, it's just interesting that if we look at the big picture, we kind of have to decide as a commission, even though this is a very small decision, it seems like it could be a degree or two that we're turning, which could then change the overall direction of Main Street, at least for now.
I'd like to comment on that, and I appreciate what you've said, and I think you're absolutely right. As to this particular parcel where the use is not changing, it is a bit of a step back, and it really doesn't comply with our vision, if you will, of the form-based code.
If that is our vision.
If that's our vision, right. On the other hand, this is a newer building in the overall scheme of things. It's one that's going to be here for a while, and probably even with a vision of a form-based code, I don't foresee this particular location changing. And that may be true of other locations along Main Street as well. But as we've studied before, there are several buildings along Main Street that probably will change, or uses will change significantly over the next few years. And I just don't know, even with the form-based code, whether, I don't know how long it will take or if it will ever be achieved, but I think the chances are, you know, better than not that as properties get redeveloped along Main Street, that the better parts of the form-based code, the structure that is in place right now will be adhered to. And I don't particularly see this lot as being one that significantly departs from the overall scheme of Main Street.
So talk to me about what you mean by this lot. The
Old fire station.
The old fire station.
Okay.
Which is,
That's the,
technically, they're not the applicant. Centerville City is
Right.
technically the applicant, but
practically, I see what you're saying.
Practically.
Okay.
I'm using it as only an example, and there are going to be others along Main Street that will fall into the same category. We can almost bet on that, so we do need to look at it overall. But using this one as an example, and others that may be similarly situated, if their uses are changed, they're going to have to comply. If their uses are not changed, we can encourage, cajole, beg, plead, you know, as they remodel their facilities, that's another opportunity for us to require compliance. But for some of these newer buildings that are out of compliance right now and the uses are not changing, it's going to be pretty hard. So our real choice in my mind is to say, you know, we're shutting off potential uses that I think would benefit our Main Street by saying no to this change. I'm afraid we stay at the status quo and continue to suffer a bit of blight down there.
I was going to say, I think it could help us in the long run to keep a business there than to have it be a vacant building that's going to not get used. I was really concerned about this when I saw the report, and then I started thinking about, and this isn't quite a perfect example because these are smaller buildings, but up in Farmington along Main Street, there have been two construction businesses across the street from each other. I think they might both be out of business now, but that show, you know, they're indoor only. They're more like a showroom type thing. And that's, you know, being surrounded by an old town site example as well. But I think in this particular case, what Chairman Hershey says is right, that we're not gonna, that's a new building. It's not gonna, nobody's gonna tear that down and do exactly what we want for Main Street, but this could be a good interim thing that we can also guide towards what we are hoping for, but keep our Main Street a little more viable.
I just real quickly, I read through the emails we got, the public comments that we did get, and was sensitive some of the concerns on there. As far as enforcement goes, I think that's always a challenge. No matter what we do, it's always going to be a challenge with enforcement. I'm not in favor of having an enforcement officer, for example, because in my opinion, an enforcement officer needs to justify their existence by enforcing stuff and issuing fines and whatever else.
Have you gotten a ticket lately, Kevin?
No, I have not, actually, no. But I do drive through Manaway a lot, and I really hate the fact that everybody has to slam on their brakes right there. Okay, we're going the speed limit, but whatever. Anyway, so enforcement is, yeah, I mean, people can always, whether you have an enforcement officer or not, people always can complain, right? And that's always an option. But that's, I don't think, regardless of what this use is, there's going to be that enforcement issue that's there. The other thing, I think that it's important, maybe for me anyway, to point out that many of the concerns that were raised in these public comments about some of the equipment and things like that were addressed by limiting this to indoor storage only. I think that changes things a little bit. We're not going to talk about a full yard full of equipment with big equipment, by other equipment I meant supplies, I guess you could say, right? So having it all be inside really changes this as well. And then separate from this, kind of getting away from the public comment, but on the Main Street stuff, I think this is a good example of, one of the things that I've tried to be consistent with is making sure that we're not putting some undue requirements on property owners. And this is a perfectly good building in terms of age and structure and whatever else. And I think it would be an undue requirement to this were a change in use to push it all the way up to the front, right? And so in some ways that's kind of why I'm maybe glad that it's not a change in use, so we don't have to trigger that extra requirement. But so all that being said, with limiting it to just interior storage only, interior that part of it, I think really makes it palatable to me. Oh, the other thing I was going to point out as well, one of the other concerns was talking about deliveries and some of that noise. That one, I can understand that. That is a concern where it does buffer or bump right up against a residential zone. But, if we want commercial along there, you're going to have deliveries regardless of what the type of business is. Don's Meats, who knows? Maybe they get, I don't know, but maybe they get meat deliveries at 5 o'clock in the morning. It seems like that could be a possibility. I don't know. And there's other things along there that probably get some type of truck that pulls up and unloads it.
Yeah.
Well, and
just so where we have a noise ordinance, we have a noise delivery ordinance so I think it's 7 or 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So you can't do it at 3 in the morning.
Well, and hopefully.
Well, you might do it, get away with it, and nobody reports it, but you're not supposed to be doing it.
If only we had an enforcement officer.
If only man.
But
Well,
would they
I
be
mean-
out at that time?
If you think of the noise too, I was sensitive to the noise, but then I realized we're going from a fire station
Right, that's what I'm saying
to
too.
possibly, I'm just saying for noise wise, that probably is a less
It's more
Startling.
predictable.
less startling and more predictable noise issue. But maybe not.
I was thinking about the concern that was raised with regard to early morning deliveries too, and I was envisioning other things that could go into that building that would be worse, right? My daughter's dance studio at 5 a.m. every morning has high fitness, and lots of people are coming to do their workouts, and I can imagine that would be worse than maybe a delivery truck. But
Okay. I think we've discussed this just at some length. We can discuss it further, but the chair would entertain a motion to get this on the floor for consideration.
I've got it. I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend to the City Council the following amendments listed in red in the staff report to the city zoning ordinance with suggested reasons for action A through G.
I'll second.
Before we move further, I just had a quick question on the way this is written in your report on the motion, Corey. Under 12.34.080, you start out with 3, but I think 3 is actually 4, and then the add is a new 3.
Did it change when it printed?
So if you look at the page before, 4 is use within a closed building, and then you're adding a new 3.
Oh, yeah, so it'd be 4.
With
Point 3.
Add a new 3, add a point 3.
You're correct.
Sorry, Corey, I had one.
Maybe ABC.
It'll automatically do it in the code.
Yeah.
The numbering, it actually goes number, letter,
Okay, so it should be ABC.
So
Probably.
usually when I create the ordinance, it'll
Okay.
generate
We'll
that.
fix it.
So
Okay.
Corey, one quick question for you on this one. Where all the storage would be inside, screening would not be required in a case like that because there's nothing to screen.
Correct. The screening then applies to their utility equipment that are used to service the building.
Air
So,
conditioning.
yeah, I mean, when you talk about it, just for clarity, the part that we're talking about, the correct numbering, is a prohibition. So that's where you cue in your prohibition on your deal.
Okay.
So screening at that point in time, because screening is in your landscaping ordinance, but outdoor storage is in your commercial ordinance. So the screening, since there'll be no outdoor storage, screening isn't required. Now, that's meaning for, the outdoor storage. Screening in your screening requirements still address buffer between commercial. So you still have to put in a fence or landscaping or combination of fence and landscaping as part of your buffer that screens the site. But the outdoor storage screening wouldn't exist because it's prohibited.
But from the road, you don't have to do any screening from the road in this case because there's nothing
Correct.
storage.
Correct. Other than your utilities that service the building, if it's new construction, have to be screened from public view also. But that is irrelevant to the outdoor storage.
Even if it's like a residential-sized air conditioner compressor unit, does that have to be screened?
Yep. All utility mechanical equipment, if rooftop has to be screened from public view, and all your wall-mounted utilities have to be screened from public view. And then it also talks about utility base equipment.
That's why you don't see it.
But when you have your big green boxes of Rocky Mountain Power, they usually
Well, you
come
don't
in and
notice.
rip the stuff out even if it's installed because they don't like battling the landscaping.
Okay. Any further debate or discussion on the motion? If not, we'll go ahead and take vote. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
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 Motion has passed. Thank you very much for your participation tonight. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Chair, I did hear one time that Mr. Dave Powers on a call ran out on the call forgetting his boots, and about 2 a.m. in the morning they said, "Mr. Powers, get your boots." Oh, okay. I had to give Dave a dig.
Thank you for that story. Item number 2 on the agenda is a discussion of the Southeast Neighborhood Plan. This was instigated by the commission, asking the planning staff to provide us with some additional information and scenarios and analysis regarding the Pages Lane Commercial District and possible general plan amendments. So we'll open our discussion with a report from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Planning Commission, we've tried to provide something to you, hopefully to spur the discussion and begin to identify direction. Cassie worked on in the report to you in the background, a kind of a broad-based picture of how we're viewing the Pages Lane commercial. It basically centers around the eastern half because our viewpoint is that trying to future plan the western half with those uses at this point in time is probably a difficult matter and a longer horizon. So we approach it from the eastern half, which is in the decline, contains most of the vacancy and decline in commercial use. So that's our focus. Cassie will,
Corey, are you going to blame Cassie for spelling Deseret desert?
it was probably me.
Desert.
I'll take the.
Not
I'll take the
dessert
blame.
either.
Not dessert either,
Because, I just trust spell check. I mean, if it passes, who cares what the word is, right?
Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's great. I could tell you some horror stories, but not now. So Cassie will kind of discuss our macro view and some of the ideas associated with it, how we're viewing it at a staff level. And then what I've done is tried to address what you requested at the work session, some data, some particularly the strong notion of park and costs, and I'll just briefly go over that to try to share our thoughts and how we are trying to create scenarios around ideas and how that might or might not integrate from our viewpoint. And then the last item that we're trying to provide to you is at least kind of targeting getting down the road to a recommendation to the council, and I'll cover that as a third element. So for now, I turn it to Cassie, who can paint the Van Gogh picture for you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've come up with a lot of ideas for this corridor over the past few months. But we found that they pretty much fell into 4 categories. So we just kind of, from a macro scale, wanted to go over those 4 separate categories. And obviously, in the language that we will propose later, and the ideas that we come up with later, they're going to probably blur into each other and melt into each other a little bit. But here are the 4 themes that we found that were kind of our land use options at this point. The first being the land use alternative number 1, to try to maintain this corridor as a commercial strip. We've talked about the pros and cons of this in the past, that the difficulty of trying to find a replacement for Dick's Market for a lot that size and for a building that size. It has been difficult for even some of the smaller grocery stores, even though everyone in that community seems to have really liked that grocery store and miss it. It's just been very hard to replace a building that large. Even though some of the smaller commercial stores around that are still going strong, like Ace Hardware, and we still have the dry cleaners and some of the smaller shops in that U-shaped building. So, but the biggest challenge has been that Dick's Market lot, which is just so big. My concerns in maintaining commercial on this strip with these sizes of buildings and lots is that commercial brick and mortar seems to be going downhill generally as a general trend, and that even though these smaller ones are still live right now, we still have the big box stores on Parrish, and we are trying to promote the smaller retail and smaller commercial on Main Street. Do we think that long term that Pages Lane will also be successful long term later on when we're trying to push these commercial businesses in other areas of town? If we do try to maintain that commercial corridor, we would probably have to recognize that it's not going to be a grocery store in the old Dick's Market. It will be something like a call center or storage, or even a vocational school of some kind. Not something quite as convenient as what the residents are looking for at this point, but it's still a possibility. The second being completely switched to residential. And we know that it's possible and that they will sell because the Wasatch Front is getting so crowded and there's such a demand for housing in Centerville as is, that we could very easily say the word and it wouldn't happen. I think the problem with this is to create that cohesive feel in this entire side of the block is unlikely to happen in a residential pattern that gives it that neighborhood feel. There's a high risk of kind of like a patchworky, piecemeal kind of development pattern if we were to totally switch over to residential. and there are certainly many design considerations that we would have to take in mind. But like I've mentioned before, and like we've discussed before, I think if we do any of these plans consider residential, whether it's the other ones I'll get to later or completely residential, I think it is good to keep in mind these other diverse housing options, like we talked about earlier. That lady really wanted floor units for older people with no stairs and master bedrooms on the bottom and stuff like that. If we are going to transition any of this to residential, I think it's good to keep those inclusionary zoning that we don't have yet, but we want to promote in this type of area, so we have more of a missing middle housing market here in Centerville for those people who want to move around that don't necessarily want a huge single family lot. The third alternative would be mixed use. Since we do have some commercials still viable here, but always the push for residential, there could be some of both on this block, especially with those smaller stores still in business. I think, like we've mentioned before, it could become kind of awkward to have these kind of patchy parcel by parcel, residential, commercial, residential, commercial. So I think a more traditional mixed use, horizontal mixed use, like I pictured here, would be much, much, much more attractive for this area, especially on the corner, the eastern 400 West corner. I think it's much more aesthetically pleasing and could transition in a way that is less awkward and more visually appealing for the entire community. And the fourth, and this is going to take apart some of what Corey has to say, because so much of our feedback was surrounded by park space, open space. So much of the community wanted that very much. And we as staff don't see commercial super successful here long term, and we know that residential is needed here in the whole region. So I think it's kind of inevitable that some of this will be residential at some point. And because of that huge desire for a park space that we heard from the community, we thought that it would be a perfect opportunity to incorporate some of that in any residential that would go there. And it would happen over probably a few phases. This is a lot of land. It's almost 9 acres. So it's not going to happen all at one time. But we want to include the fact that if it does, anything that happens there, we want to at least take into consideration that open space and some kind of public space that ties this community together with the school across the street and townhomes coming in across the street, and the commercial and Deseret industries. So it could just provide some kind of public space to hang out and walk your dog, and that ties it all together for whatever development will happen on the eastern half of that block. I think it's a perfect opportunity for some kind of gathering space with the school and the commercial and the residential all within this block. It could have a really amazing neighborhood feel and an opportunity to create something unique there that's not just a tall lot thrown into an apartment complex kind of a feeling. So I think this, in weighing all our options, we wanted to dream a little, but also have something that was maybe manageable and realistic and that could be doable in the future. So we thought that this was a good compromise of listening to the community and considering their desires and their wants, but also making something a little bit more tangible.
So with that, I tried to, I think we heard loud and clear from two different venues. The public comment was park, cemetery, parks, park, cemetery, park or cemetery, but we heard a lot of comments about parks and cemeteries. So I think that's a strong value that came out of the public forum. I think also the work session with the Planning Commission was very much, the commission wanted to take that matter seriously and wanted to have some discussion about that. What does it mean and so forth. And so I think I'll premise, start from the beginning, is when you think about a park in this area, you know, the comments that we got was park and we're willing to pay for it. So that became kind of the theme to work off. What does meaning pay, we're willing to pay for it? Well, I think the default meaning is that we're willing to have our leaders of the city take the taxes and the funds that they receive and purchase a park for this community. I mean, I think that's probably what was meant. We're willing to pay for it. But I think there's other ways to be looking at that, and we'll try to answer a couple of those questions. But you know, the first one is we went to the county records. The caveat is we're using the county market analysis. In the end, when you buy something, it's what somebody's willing to pay for it. So some are willing to pay for more. And in the case of a facility that might be in decline, it might be less. So I think it's important to understand that these numbers are not reflective, because somebody could, you know, if they can't market in one use, it might be marketable in another use, but it might have to go at a lower value to go to that use. Or if there's an opportunity to a redevelopment that can bring a higher and better use to it, then obviously the land value would go up. So I caveat these numbers. These are county, what they assess it at. That's what we're working off of. We went through the various parcels and looked at the valuations. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parcels. Parcel A, 1.2 million. Parcel B, this is the one that I originally used in calculating impact fee issues, 440,000 for 1.43 acres. Parcel C is 3 acres at $1.18 million. Parcel D, the valuation is 1.5 million, at just over an acre and a half. Parcel E was about a little over a third acre, 344,000. So trying to make sense of these numbers, we have a total area of 8.17 acres of this eastern half. Again, it's what people want to pay for it, but the total market value of valuation is $4.7 million for the property. That roughly averages out just less than $600,000 an acre. And so using those valuations, we said, okay, if you want to look at scenario for parks, you know, what does that really mean? The first thing that we wanted to go to is our parks plan. So I do want to call out in our parks plan where the city believes they are at their park acreage per population. The parks element of the city's general plan says we currently exceed the national standard for park space. Now, there is a little bit of caveat that you do that, is that we have a large parcel up on the mountainside in Passive.
That's what I was wondering.
So, you know, keep that as a caveat. I tried to bring that later into the data, that some of those large passive areas contribute to being in excess of the national standard. So the issue is if the passive foothills really is park space, or is it just preservation of view and doesn't really function as park space?
Do you know what our acreage per 1,000 population would be without it?
I didn't.
I was trying to do some quick math, and I was like, I don't really know how to do that. So.
We're about 16.5, and I showed down here that we're, well, I'll get to it in a second.
Yeah, 45 acres.
Yeah. So I went to our parks plan and looked at our neighborhood park size. So this is just the idea that you're putting in a neighborhood park. This is not a regional park, so it's the middle, value. Our average, using our 3 or 4 neighborhood parks, we're about 3 acres. So if we were just to say it's important to put a park in this neighborhood and the city's going to pay for it by dollars. So we're going to acquire the land. Using the county valuation, 3 acres is about $1.7 million of expenditure at that value. And it would be 3 acres, and then the remaining 8 acres, 5 acres would be ripe for whatever redevelopment scenario you're thinking about. Another one is to say, okay, we maybe not need a 3-acre park in this neighborhood. What's our pocket park? Now, pocket parks are controversial. It takes a lot to move equipment over there and just take care of and mow 10 feet of grass and take care of the slide that's broken and then move on. I can tell you our Parks Department does not like our pocket park at Centerville Commons, but that is a little over a half acre. So if you did a pocket park, and city acquired it, you know, now you're taking it from $1.7 million to $391,000 for a pocket park. And is a pocket park and that value have a good trade-off for the community? And these are all value judgment. I can't say that there's good or bad. There's some pretty nice pocket parks in some large cities that were very expensive, and they're great places to gather. So it just depends on what you think the value of it is. The third scenario, I was trying to get this idea of how do we look at maybe the concept that if we're transitioning uses, and our focus of transitioning uses is right there at the center across J.A. Taylor Elementary. You know, we heard from the work session that some type of buffer between the Deseret Industry site and redevelopment site would be a good idea. I think the focal point being across from the J.A. Taylor is a good fit with that buffer. And so could we look at some type of private-public partnership that helps facilitate some public access and facilitates the buffer? So these are rough numbers, but you know, what we're looking at is if you're to redevelop the 8 acres into residential, so this is the concept that you're moving entirely to a residential development, the yard area requirement in residential would encompass 40% of the site, non-residential. So this is, or non-single family. So these numbers are generated that we're not doing single family development. Some type of multifamily development or more is taking place here. When you have that, 40% of your land has to be in some type of green space. Now, when you're looking at that, you have, you know, various ways of doing that. You have yards to units. You certainly don't want the public tramping through your front yard or your backyard. So you have opportunity to flex that space into private and public, 50% into the public common open for the entire residential neighborhood, with the other 50% being the front yards and backyards of that neighborhood. But the total value, again, it comes back to this 3 acres. They have to put 3 acres of their own open space into the project. And that's fairly costly. So if they're doing 3 acres, actually 3.2 of the 8.17 acres, that valuation would be 1.8 million. So it's interesting. If we were to acquire it, it's 1.7. If they are building it for their private development, it costs them 1.8. So it's a pricey value for green space as a whole. The way we just quickly went is an idea. I can't account for whether the city's general fund and whether the city council wants to amend their capital improvements program and their general funding and go towards this direction. I can't guesswork very much on the recreation arts tax, because that's being dedicated to building the city park and the soccer fields over there. A lot of money is you know, $1 million is heading over there as of late. It costs more than $1 million, but as of late, to finish out the park, you're looking at another $1 million for the soccer fields. But what I could do is say, okay, in a private-public partnership, you know, building of parks is generally some hard money somewhere, not your maintenance money, and we use park impact fees. And this is the whole struggle about parks development. People struggle with density, but density is the part that where we get the impact fee, so that when new residential units are online and the people are moving into that, we charge a fee so that it can go towards adding to the parks or acquiring parks. And impact fees can only be used for the acquiring of parks. You can't pay for maintaining and cutting the grass. So when you turn down density, you're turning down opportunities for additional park space. So then you have to readjust your capital improvements program on how much park space we're going to build versus how much we're going to maintain. But always, every time you add more park space, you add the maintenance future cost in perpetuity, if you will, to that. So it's a struggle balance. So one of the things I think is important for the community to understand is if they constantly say we want low density, we want half-acre lots, we want quarter-acre lots, we want low density, there's a cost factor to that. Not saying that that's bad, but to turn around and say, but we want park space too, it's not going to match and line up the stars very well. So I took the impact fee of a little over $2,000 and said, okay, in a public-private partnership, if we could make the stars align, use some of their open space that's required in a part of the project, they're paying impact fees. Would the city entertain partnering with those impact fees and foregoing other park improvements somewhere else and fund them in a different way, partner with this developer? 4 units an acre, $65,000 of park impact fees. Not a ton of money. For me, that's a lot of money, but for park space, that's not a lot of money. 8 units an acre, $133,000. 12 units an acre. This is the bad word of late. High-density residential. You're generating $201,000. Significantly more, but still, in the end of $1.8 million, it's not a lot of money. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that if a developer's coming in and we're looking at somehow trying to do some master planning and phasing, they have to pay the park impact fee. They have to put in the green space. Could there be a carrot for at least the impact fees or some added general fund or whatever to create an opportunity where a small portion of that open space that's common to the development could be shared in common with the general public, and the return of the impact fees may be a carrot that might be interesting to them to entertain. But again, you can see how much is generated based on density, and I think that's the message what I'm trying to share is density is a component in the redevelopment. If we're going to transition to residential and we want low density development, then you're really saying that this is a standalone residential development, no park space, and it's private yards for that single family development. And that's going to be the reality of what's happening there. So the last scenario was the issue of Island View Park. I did, Chair Hershey, I hope you got the exchange, because there was a lot of opinions flying around in the exchange of what it costs to build parks, what this land grant means. I never really got a final clarity answer in the emails, but this is what I did gather. Island View Park was bought with grants that are federally and state controlled, and their program is centered around discouraging attritioning that out of a park space. It's not totally impossible because you have to do a like value and trade. Understand that additional park impact fees are not on the table in the case of that land grant, so you would not be able to use park impact fees. So this is general funding. And I think that's where the expense is coming in, is general funding of taxes to take 4 acres at Island View and replace it 4 acres somewhere else and not use the additional park impact fee. And then getting the state, federal government in the grant program to approve trading that park space is difficult. So I think the message that I got is it impossible? No. Is it cost effective? Probably not. To take 4 acres and use $2 million now to buy it over and replace 4 acres of park at the Pages Lane area is probably not a likely scenario in our view of looking at it. Just going over the parks and open space, I thought this was important because I think this community is not lacking in its open space. It might be lacking in its kind of open spaces or the desirability and use of its open spaces. But this community has quite a bit of public facility space, and our current parks plan includes that into the planning effort. So Centerville Elementary, Centerville Junior High, J.A. Taylor school facilities are counted as park space in our plan. The cemetery is, believe it or not. I don't know if it's, very conducive to 3 a.m. walks through the cemetery, but interesting on October 31st, maybe.
Parks are closed at 3 a.m. anyway, Corey.
Oh, okay.
What about?
Oh, is that why I got the ticket from Ticket Tom? No,
You didn't put the other elementaries on here. Is there a reason?
just in this neighborhood.
Just in this neighborhood.
Just
okay.
in this neighborhood. The county retention, 2 acres, but the county wants to develop half of it, and then the other half go to the city, so that may deteriorate by an acre. City Hall, Whitaker Museum, 4 acres. Founders, or the current debate on whether it's Smith Family Park. Island View Park, about 6 acres. I thought it was about 4 or 6. I think where you get skewed in the national standard is this 160 acres of the area up on the mountainside. So I tried to give some recognition. There's 205 acres in this community, but that large passive area takes it out, and so you have about 45 acres in all reality into the community. And then there's your link to the government grant place for the status of Island View Park and the grant process for conversion. Anyhow, I think from our standpoint, we see the eastern half ripe for redevelopment. We see the western half, or the middle part, across from J.A. Taylor, buffering the Desert Industries facilities, is a good place to establish not only a transition of use buffer, which is normal under our ordinances, but I also think that it's the right place to focus any type of opportunity that we might see about public access to some type of open, space. Interesting enough, I came back from Boston over the weekend. Fascinating city, and urban design in me was just pinging off the charts, and my family was just, can we just look at Paul Revere's house without you having to comment on how it frames the street? But I did see these kind of linear and pocket parks, these fountains and small ponds, several different places into the city, and the people gathering in those areas. Now, obviously, the population and the synergy of downtown Boston is different than Centerville. I don't think Centerville wants to be a Boston. If you do, let me know. We've got to change everything. But there was some interesting and nice, small, passive, and somewhat active several different splash pads, shallow ponds, frog pond on the Boston Commons. The places gathered, and so, I don't know the feasibility of development community, but I do bring up the park impact fees. There's open space, the buffer. There might be opportunity to respond to the public if the stars aligned and finances of impact fees or something are diverted to create a good buffer and add some small element. I do think it'll be small. I don't think it's a 3-acre park. We can try if that's what we want to do, but I think the cost is probably, from my viewpoint, cost prohibitive given where we're at. So. And I think the transition to residential, I think the discussion is if the push is to go to the single family, which I don't think is a bad option. I really don't. I do think it'll be small lot single family. I do think it's something that you would see probably more than 4 units an acre, even if it was single family. I think if you do some multifamily where we can cluster a little bit more in the open space, generate a little bit more impact fees. Maybe we could do a little bit better in getting to some type of partnership. And then as a planner, I can't, throw it on the table. If Dick's Market, the Scout Store, if those uses are still viable, because we heard some comment of that, we can still look at how you would do some mixed use so that the corner area or some location could function for a small hardware store. In the area to be viable, the Scout Store to be viable, and then wrap that with a type of housing. But I do think you need to bump up the density issue beyond 4 units an acre to get to that component. So the other thing I think we're worried about is there needs to be some synergy established first. I've used this in several emails. I call it an east to west development pattern, but I don't mean it in how it actually gets developed. I think The east side is where you look at how you lay it out so that the buffer on the west side, and if there is a public feature, gets installed. So starting out on the west side and building a bunch of units and then waiting for the east side is not going to work for that buffer and that element. I think the west side incorporates that, and then the phasing and development as it could move to one type of product on 2/3 of it, and then the mixed use on the eastern half. I think it's not even the same type of residential. I think you could flex that a little bit. But I do think that if we're going to do a strong buffer, we're going to do even a partnership, the west carries that burden, and the rest of the pattern of development comes in, shows how it doesn't cut off the east half to be integrated as part of the neighborhood. So that's our story, and we're sticking to it.
Thank you, Corey. Before we open it up for general discussion, the one thing that I didn't see in here, and I suppose that there's good reason for that, because we haven't met with all of the stakeholders on the entire block, but.
Oh yeah, I didn't go over the timing in our report. Thanks for reminding me real quick. I think from what we're looking at is we're not trying to say you make a final decision, but what kind of alternatives, languages do you want to see? Is it commercial? Is it mixed use? We'd like an opportunity to get some thematic ideas, not the final language of the plan, but directions and goals. If we did this scenario, these are the top topics in that scenario. If we do this scenario, or if it's only one scenario, I'll leave it up to you. But we could put together an outline and bullet points, pros and cons, something that allows the discussion, because you indicated in your work session you want to invite property owner and business owners. We would take that list and bring them back into more of this forum rather than an open house, so that we could present alternative ideas and allow them to have feedback on it, have a dedicated time in a meeting to do that. Then once you hear that information, whether it's that meeting or a subsequent meeting that you feel you need to absorb that, then you can say, okay, we heard good about this and good about this and this. Staff, here's 2 alternatives. Explore these 2 alternatives. Come back to us with draft language. And then once we arrive to the draft language, we would then re-notice out again to the property owners and stakeholders for the official public hearing for you to begin the debate process for a recommendation. So,
thanks, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was part of my comment. We've always talked about, or at least I have, making this a holistic approach, which would and should include not only the east half, which is on the table right now, but what does that do for, and what is the impact on, and how can the west property owners participate in this process?
Yeah, good point. We can, and I think the new language still has to cover their part of the, even if it's leave as is, it needs to have language to talk about supporting the as is. Right. Also.
Right, and I think that there's good justification for that, and I don't have any empirical data on this, but I've seen this happen in other places where you rezone a portion of a block. Perhaps it's a mixed use, perhaps it's something else. You have some old timers, if you will, some property owners that aren't really impacted immediately by that. But whatever you do on part of that block is going to affect them.
Right.
And what I would hope is that the planning we do impacts them favorably to the point where we can encourage them to participate and become part of this private-public partnership.
Good point.
And my thinking specifically is with Deseret Industries. We've already had some indication from them that they're willing to consider participating. I would guess that Steak and Shake, Pizza Parlor, everybody that's down on that west side is ultimately going to benefit from, number 1, more rooftops, number 2,
good point,
a park, number 3, just beautifying the neighborhood. It's not going to hurt them, and ultimately, I think the goal would be that we make it a very symbiotic relationship with whatever we do in that area. And so in my view, I would hope that the commission would look to developing guidelines and alternatives that would be an enticement not only to those who wish to develop the east side, but also an enticement to people on the west side to be enthused about to participate in this, and perhaps reduce the burden on the city and perhaps even on the developer and the people that are on the east side, so that it makes sense economically to do a holistic.
Yeah, I think if whatever scenario come up, staff certainly can address some tactical elements to create that encouragement, and how that other side, as they change or even update, that there is some benefit to participate rather than to be standalone in their redevelopment scenario.
That's my thought. Others?
Well, I loved this report. Loved it. And I know that when we asked you to do this at the work session, you were like, I know this money, we don't know if it's going to be right. And we kept pushing back, and we said, we know, but we kind of just want to see. So you've done an awesome job. And I recognize, like you said, that these are county valuations, which may or may not be completely accurate. But just having those numbers and having that all-in-one space is very helpful. So I really appreciate a lot of the work.
And I appreciate the push to bring that to the table.
Well, sometimes I push.
I don't mean it in a negative. I mean just saying, hey, staff, do your job.
Also, I thought that the mixed-use picture looked just like Stars Hollow, and I'm like, if anyone knows Stars Hollow, does anyone here know Stars Hollow? I was like, oh my gosh, I'm transported to Stars Hollow in Centerville. It's from a show, but anyway. And then finally, I was looking at the scenario analysis for potential park, and with scenario 4, I was thinking, despite what you said, so you're telling me there's a chance, like there might.
I have an email. Chair Hersey saw it. I says, so for clarity, are you saying this? I did the same thing.
So you're telling me there's a chance, which means obviously it would, but it's the status of that grant is far more. I'm much happier with seeing that, and I read through it, and it talked about conversion and them not wanting to, they want to avoid conversion, but the conversion does happen, and so that can happen. Obviously, that would have to be, we'd still have to fund that if that was going to happen. I was going to ask you a little bit about the impact fees, because you mentioned that right now the way that they're being allocated, they're just going straight into the general fund. Is that correct? Or what did you say?
No, I can't count for the financing. I can give you the principle. The principle is new development pays its fair share towards the park's planning of a community.
Right.
The impact fee is a fee charged based on a study that justifies the fee per dwelling unit, as well as it's a fee that has to be used in a designated time period. So it is a restricted fund. For and in behalf of park development, not maintenance.
But you don't know if we are currently, are we currently following that the way it should be followed?
I don't have the details of the finances records. I know that the budget session's been looking at various accounts and making sure that we have enough for our streets. And so forth. I don't know what's tracked on when they're paid and when it's paid out. I don't know those specific details personally.
Okay, and then I appreciated your conversation about impact fees and how they are for the funding of, obviously, the whole purpose is for funding of parks. But I will push back a little bit and say that we could fund parks through alternative funding. Now, it's not easy to do, right?
Oh, no, I didn't say that. It's how you decide to fund your parks. And the general pattern is population growth pays for new parks and expansion parks. But no, you're right. You can use, if you just want to use general fund budget to buy and acquire a park, that's also a capital improvement can be in the budget of the city.
And I understand that obviously from a public budgeting standpoint, that's not a wise, I mean, if you have this impact fee that is sole purpose is to pay for parks, then yeah, you should use it for parks.
And
But
save
I-
other monies for
and
maintenance.
save other for money.
But you know,
But I-
recognizing you may not want growth, and so you have to
Yes.
fund it a different way.
And I'm not necessarily against growth, but I do think that with this weird sort of situation that we're in where, you know, the public really does not want 12 units an acre.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that we can't have any parks. Like, they're not mutually exclusive that, oh, we have to have high density or else we have no parks. Obviously, they generate fees for parks, yes. But we don't have to be constrained by that being our only way to fund parks.
In theory, you're right. It can be funded every way. Knowing the city's budget and the costs of the streets, we're not funding parks in the general fund. We're funding it through growth. Now, does that have to stay that way? Absolutely not. It doesn't have to stay that way. But that is the pattern of funding budgeted for the last many years.
Well, and that's where I think when you stated on our work session, you said, you know, that's sort of a city council hat type of thing, right? So I understand that, but I do think it's important that we recognize that we are not required to in order to get a park, to use impact fees. And I also think it's important that we don't completely shut the door, like Chair Hershey was saying, on, and I don't think we were shutting the door. I think we really need to remember that partnership that we could have with surrounding neighbors, and also not shutting the door on the idea of Island View Park exchange. Those are my thoughts.
Corey, I have two questions for you. So with regard to scenario 3, do the impact fees that are generated that you have listed here assume that all 8.17 acres minus the 3.2, 40% open space are developed at 12 units per acre, and that generates the 200,000?
Yeah, the gross acreage is the whole project.
Okay. That's not a per acre
No,
number?
that is 201,000 for all the units.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly. So we've had some discussions about this Island View Park and the fact that it was paid for by this Land Water Conservation Fund grant way back in the day. Are there any other similar available grants that we could look at for purposes of maybe purchasing a larger acreage? Because I have to admit, I'm not particularly enamored of the idea of pocket parks for a number of reasons. I would like to have a pretty decent sized park space if we're going to do it. And I'm wondering if we could get creative in funding and look for state grants, federal grants, you know.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not a grant writer, and I don't know what the city's used in the past for acquisition of park expansions. Yes, there's grant monies. I don't want to say there's not. What they're tied and hitched to are often have duality purpose, so you have to be doing one thing, doing another, and then match it. So certainly there may be other opportunities. You know, right now my familiarity is, you know, the active transportation grants are very active, pun intended, aggressive, being pushed by state and county and the Prop 1 monies for the active transportation routes. Can they, you know, but they're probably tied to transportation related issues rather than, you know, money for a park.
It's just something that I think that we should potentially look at exploring to see if there is some type of grant money out there that would fit what it is that we're looking to do, and whether the conditions or the trade-offs would.
You're right, and I think your issue is if you really feel that this needs to be a city acquisition plan, then you front that and then let the process decide if pursuing those grants and everything is a feasible idea.
Well, I think that it would be helpful to tell our citizenry, hey, one option is we could put in a 3-acre park, and it's going to cost us $1.72 million, and we can fund this out of the general fund, or here's an alternative, right? And if people want to spend less, we could maybe chase down this grant. I don't know. Maybe I'm.
Yeah, I think that's where I pushed back at the work session. I don't think that's our role at this point.
Got it.
To make that decision.
Oh, I'm not saying to make the decision. I'm just saying to kind of throw out the options,
Yeah.
right?
For
Whether
the
it's
public,
even,
Yeah, I think our role is to do the land use pattern, and if you feel this neighborhood needs a park, and that's something you want to recommend, I send that, and you make your findings and suggestions and arguments that the council seriously considers that recommendation, why you think that recommendation is important, why you think you heard it from the public, and they have to struggle with whether they want to amend their parks plan, whether they want to revamp how they fund parks and make that. I don't think we can make land use decisions on, if we can get a park, we'll recommend it, but if we can't get a park, then we'll do something else. I think you look at the land use pattern, and is this the right place to put a community facility?
I appreciate that viewpoint, and I agree with it, but I think that we also need to look realistically as to whether what we're going to be proposing is feasible, because if it's simply not feasible, it's not something that I
Yeah,
want
my
to
answer
toss
to
out there.
you is, this is as much as I can get you.
No,
And
but-
I think it's not feasible, but I'm just one person and don't vote.
Let me throw out an idea that goes along with Commissioner Hayman's thoughts on this. It seems to me that, yes, it is a city council decision, but unless we send a recommendation with some logic behind it, I'm not sure it has legs, okay?
Agreed.
And so, as part of our process, and as we go through these hearings that you've outlined, we have the meetings with the stakeholders. We find out their level of interest and participation. What I'd really like to do is go to the commission or the council and say, our plan includes a park. It includes, some residential, perhaps some commercial, whatever we come up with. And this can be done, we believe, if we seek these funding sources. If we look at grants, if we look at private.
If that's your goal, then my suggestion is that the message to the city council is that you're on hold for moving forward, and let's hire someone to go through that process and feasibility study. That's what you're asking for, is a feasibility study.
Well, can we allow them to hire someone if they?
Yeah, you're putting a request up. We'd like you to hire this and see what they say.
But I'm saying we could still give them a recommendation, and then they can say, well, let's take this recommendation in consideration and hire someone. I mean, we don't necessarily have to say, hire someone before you consider this recommendation, but we kind of think it could be
Yeah,
done.
and that's what I'm trying to say is, do you want a feasibility study before you make a land use pattern decision? Do you want a feasibility study to put a recommendation associated with the city, do a feasibility study before they make a final decision? I think you have that latitude, but at this point, the feasibility study is an animal unto itself. You're talking about something on a level of a CDA and an RDA project. And that's just something that their staff just does not have the resources to serve you. So I think if you want a park, you put it into the land use plan, and you can add a recommendation that you've heard X, Y, and Z, this is why you're pushing it, and part of your recommendation is the city do a feasibility study before they reject the plan, and let them decide if they want to put that kind of merit into it.
Well, and I think you're actually saying the same things, because I think that's what we want to do, but we also, in our timeline, it talks about, having that public comment, public hearing, and I think at that time, we can let the public know we don't have a full feasibility study, but this is the ballpark of what it's going to cost the city. So allowing them to have that information, then hearing the public feedback from that would help us.
I'm just, unfortunately, have to tell you, I can't get you the ballpark. I've given you.
No, you have it. That's what I'm saying right
Yeah.
here. This is it.
Yeah, this is as close as I'm going to get.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is it.
$1.7 million for a neighborhood park.
So I had a couple of comments real quick. I think that the conversation about, well, it's pretty clear, obviously, or I think it's pretty clear that the city, the public doesn't really have appetite for high-density residential, and I think that 4 units is about as much as a lot of people would like to go. Maybe you could get them to go to 5, I don't know, but certainly not 12, and I think 8 is really pushing it as far as what a lot of people's appetite is for that stuff. The mixed use is an interesting type of an idea. It does seem to make some sense, but unfortunately I think in this case it only really makes sense if you're looking at that map up there. Maybe scroll up just a little bit. It only makes sense if you were to do it in like the AB area versus the D and E, because the DE is what really needs to be low density residential or a park or some open space, because that's buffering right up on other low density stuff as well. And then as far as the park goes, we did hear, you know, loud and clear that that's what a lot of people would like to see there. I believe, I've said this before, that I believe as a city we are underparked, just regardless of what the math actually says, because maybe we're cheating a little bit with the 100 acres on the mountain, right? 160 acres on the mountain. So that goes along with where I would say let's not touch Island View Park, because we kind of already, if we go from underparked to even more underparked by moving Island View Park, then that's doesn't really help our situation with that one. So I would like to see a decent sized park right there. I think that would make a lot of sense. 3 acres or so. By rough, quick calculations, without the parking lot, Porter Walton Park looks like it's about 2.5, 2 3/4, 2 2/3, somewhere right in there. So maybe, you know, that size or a little bit bigger than that size seems to make sense or something like that. So, so as far as if we're looking at proposals for things to throw out there, something that includes a decent sized park, not a pocket park. I agree with Commissioner Heyman on that one. Yeah. That Centerville Commons, right? Pocket park. I did not know until just a couple of months ago that that was a city park. And I would bet that a lot of other people are the same way. Like, I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know until I was on the parks committee.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, and we have a park here. And I'm like, no, we don't. They're like, yeah, we have a park right here.
Yeah. So
it's gated, you know, like in a gated area. And we maintain it.
It's cute, but does it really do what we're trying to get it to do, which is, you know, get people out? But no, it doesn't. So a decent sized park there with some low density residential is one of the options. And then of course the other thing that we heard loud and clear from people is to just leave it as commercial. So that always, I think, needs to be one of the options that we weigh as well. So
just to put some numbers to Kevin's comment, the national standard 10 acres per thousand population, city has 15.26 acres. If you take the 160 out, we're at about 3.35 acres per thousand. So we're, depending on how you want to view that, could be reason or not to consider a park in that area at all.
Wow. Yeah, even the whole 8 acres wouldn't even get us up to that, probably, right?
No, exactly. So, and that's really expensive for the city, so I think that's a consideration. But not that we shouldn't maybe consider some of that 160 acres at some point, but since we don't have a plan there, and I don't know how accessible or usable it is to the average public in its current state.
Right, and that's a really good point as well, that a lot of that 160 acres is not accessible to the public because a lot of that is up above the gate to the gun range, and that is essentially, yeah, you could hike up there, I guess, if you wanted to, but it's really out of bounds to the public, so almost probably half of it or more is not.
Yeah, it functions more. The Foothills Park space functions as the view shed protection zone and a fire break, you know, wildland fire interface zone.
But even in terms of like a recreational area where people want to go and do stuff, the whole, from the gate to the gun range and up, that's not really accessible to the public.
Well, and I agree with you, but I will also push back and say, I don't know how this is actually termed or defined, but Dual Creek, all of those areas, I mean, I know my family personally recreates up there almost weekly, and we have neighbors and neighbors and neighbors that also recreate. So I don't know if that's actually considered, it's like an open space, but it's not that we own, and it's, I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily part of the city, but I do think we have some good open space up there too. But I agree that I still think we are underparked.
We haven't really mentioned the fact that the city is still struggling with the cemetery issue. Somehow they've got to solve that. And it seems to me that if there is a possibility that there could be some opening of cemetery space in the Island View Park, and maybe it's not all of Island View Park, but even if it is all of Island View Park, I think that should come into play, because the city's going to have to spend some money somewhere to
Yeah,
here
I know that
on
they have
Bridges Lane.
discussion, and I can get you a link and report to you on the minutes. You know, I don't remember what the city said, but there's been discussion on whether the city even wants to remain providing cemeteries.
Well,
Oh,
I think that,
really?
well, I know that they say that because it's expensive, but I think and this is just me as citizen Kevin Daly speaking, but as citizens of Centerville, I think it is in our long-term best interest for the city to be in the cemetery business, because if we don't have a cemetery here, when we die and try and get buried in Bountiful, it's going to cost us 4 times as much to do that, right? And so it either costs us now or costs us later to do that. So a cemetery, I think that is also another option for this spot here. We heard that from a lot of people in the public, to do that here. Maybe you do that as a combination park cemetery or something like that. I think those are uses that can go together when done.
Well,
correctly.
and if you look at Island View Park, though, I mean, the whole bottom 2 levels are just junky. I mean, they are not.
But aren't we spending money on fixing them up right now? Or
Well,
about to?
do we have to?
Yeah, I think as you think about this, I would go
The
back
top
to the
is
city
great.
council minutes and review those of what they've discussed about Island View and cemetery expansion, because I think that is not a final word. I don't think they've made a final decision, right, Lisa? But I think that gives you an indication that where the city is struggling. I mean, you look at the property tax increase to try to keep up with our roads. I think if you look at the cemetery and its costs, and then you add $1.7 million into a park, you know, I'll just be honest with you, I think it's not going to be the direction that we go.
It would be helpful.
I don't think you should not recommend it, but I just think in the end, it's not a direction that will go.
It would be helpful if staff has if you know which minutes those are, if
Yeah,
you
if
could
you could give
circulate
Yeah,
those
we'll have to
minutes.
research what those
That'd be
couple,
great.
there was 2 or 3 meetings that they met on, and we'd give you those dates or copies, print those so that you can see their discussion, so that you'll be prepared in these other, other areas.
I would assume they're available on Novus, so
Yeah.
we could just identify the dates and we could get into those.
Well,
Well,
Dave, mind if I chime in real quick?
Please.
Sure. I like the idea of a park. I don't know if we can pay for it. I know the Corey, you're uncomfortable with the idea of saying park's great if we can pay for it. Assuming it's not, I feel like that at least, and I know Kevin agrees with me on this, at least 8 units an acre is where we would need to be on that piece. I am not opposed to that, having housing across it. Half of it of a park I can see is perhaps the direction it's going. So as far as if you want direction, Corey, me speaking obviously for the majority of the commission.
Which we know you'll change your mind in a second anyway. But.
Depends on where you
Not
vote.
tell us why.
However, I would like to see that direction, discussion of a little bit of that site plan you put together before, that was kind of a hybrid from what Brighton Homes had brought in. And I think that would be useful moving forward. That being said, I could vote for rezoning it to a park right now. Should I entertain a motion?
don't think that's on the agenda.
Did we properly notice for
No, I
that?
don't think that's noted. I don't think
That
that's.
was in jest, just to keep Lisa awake over there.
In terms of direction
Yeah.
to staff,
And just real quick, I'll be honest with you, staff will not come to you with a recommendation of the park unless some drastic things change. I think an investment in the community, the budgetary constraints, the land use pattern, the partnership is most that the staff will probably end up supporting to you. So you pursue what you want to, need to do. I have to be honest with you that, I think the land use pattern, taking a land with value to the demolition costs, and then to construct the park on top of the acquisition, you're not thinking about. And I think to take that, what could be producing to the neighborhood in a designed residential pattern in a partnership, takes the investment in the land and puts a better community value than a park on the southern border that's shared with everybody else in Bountiful and not paid for in by Bountiful residents. And so, you know, I think from our standpoint, we'll recommend what we're going to recommend. You go where you need to recommend. I don't want to talk you out of it. But I think, you know, that's the struggle into the planning, is trying to take a value, even it's in depreciation state, and then to acquire it, then to demo it, then to build the park. You know, you're not talking just $1.7 million. You're talking $5 to $6 million for a 3-acre park in my
But see, Corey,
lowballing. So,
you know, even the residents of Bountiful would, in theory, pay for a park right there through additional sales taxes, maybe not necessarily DI, because that's different, but, you know, going to the Steak and Shake or the pizza place, or who knows, maybe you get a destination park in there.
And you're the citizen planners, but I'll just be honest with you, that won't be staff's recommendation.
Well, and also I was going to say, just to remind, we're talking about general plan here, right? We're not actually talking
No, this
about,
is what's used to implement the zoning ordinance. And so we begin to change the zoning ordinance to implement the general plan. And I just think it's bad policy, given what I know about everything that I'm experiencing as a professional planner, to say converting this to a park is not the right land use pattern. So you're welcome to disagree. I'm fine with that. I'm not offended by it. And I'll craft the best I can to be honoring to what you recommend. But I think, you know, honestly, you probably could keep the park on the table, but you need to keep another option onto the table and talk about that other option just as serious as about a park.
I know Shaylin wants to talk, but can I just make a quick response to that? I was surprised that a couple of years ago when I ran for city council, I was talking about the RAP tax with a number of different people. That was a common thing that I talked with people. They said, do you support the RAP tax, and why or why not? And why do you think we should have taxes? And and all these different things. And time and again, I heard this story that I didn't know until I ran, that the community park was largely finished and funded through donation of trees, donation of citizens coming and planting those trees, planting the grass, coming together, and they spoke of it as this this coming together of Centerville, and this and really some sort of bore this testimony that if we tax and we pay for that through taxes, you're removing this opportunity for us to come together as a city. And it was so interesting to me, because that's not a typical way of doing business, right? And it's also not something that I even knew about. But I thought that was a very interesting scenario. I'm not saying that necessarily we're going to have people raising their hand to donate trees or grass or anything for this if we choose to go forward with this recommendation and it hypothetically goes forward. But I will say that yes, it's going to cost. It's going to come at a cost. But I feel like Centerville is unique in some situations that I've come to realize as I've lived here, and there are a lot of different ways to pay for that cost.
Yeah, I'm a non-voting member.
So, in listening to the comments, I have not heard a single person say that they are supportive of pursuing a commercial area. So I think that, would we agree in terms of helping staff narrow down what it is that we want them to come back with, that we can say, don't pursue the commercial option at this point?
I'd like to also comment that the mixed use option, I like mixed use, but I just feel like isolated mixed use kind of defeats the purpose of mixed use. So I'd even like to speak against mixed use at this particular site.
For east of Desert Industries.
That's right. I feel on Main Street, maybe don't want to kick any store. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Shaylin. Sorry. What? Yes,
Stars Hollow.
please.
Well, I would say in terms of that commercial thing, I think if we're thinking about it in terms of crafting language for general plan, is that something along the lines of it, you know, it remains commercial as it is until the time is right to convert to a.
Right. I think from my perspective, it's the answer to that latter question, right? Because I don't think that anybody is excited to touch it until we know what we want to go in there. But I am not excited to have a call center or a storage center or some vocational school go into that area. That's not where I see that area going. And so I would not be in favor of asking staff to prepare anything to promote the commercial piece of that. But likewise, I also don't want to see this entire area just go residential either. I think that is a real missed opportunity if we allow it to go all residential. I am not actually quite as opposed to the idea of mixed use there, although I'd have to see some ideas on that. In terms of,
I think you play with density at that point in time,
Yeah.
and that's where your angst is going to be.
and in terms of that, I know you don't agree with us, but I would still like to see staff put forth some type of a proposal for a city park there. But I would also, I mean, of all the ideas that we've talked about, the two I want to see the most are the city park and then the idea of this private-public partnership. And trying to make
Again,
that work.
I can create a scenario with a park. I cannot give you the feasibility of the park.
Yeah. No, I completely recognize that. And then I'm just speaking for me in terms of if I want to create a park, I don't want just another Founders Park, which is a fantastic park, but it's a park. I would prefer to see some type of unique or a destination park, right? With something like I've thrown this out here before. Maybe I'm just becoming more enamored with it as I throw it out there, right? But some kind of like a skate park or a dog park or splash pads I've seen, but I think we could do something cool there. Or maybe like this chess park was kind of cool, the picture that you had included. So that would be my input and direction to staff for what it's worth. Oh, and Logan, I think that we could probably go up to 8 units per acre.
So-
I would not be in favor of going
So
over
8 at a minimum, Corey.
8.
Yeah.
No, I think we can put together a scenario that talks about the languages and well, first we start with a thematic element of some type of park and what, those can kind of be. So I want to, say we can't provide you the information, but, my pushback is do not expect from staff on the strategic plan for getting a park. I think you either recommend that as part of your recommendation, the city study that before they discount it, or accept it if they don't want to study it, and put it in the land bank to hopefully do it someday in the future. But, at this point in time, a feasibility of grant monies, how it's going to be paid for, making decisions and trying to go to the council and tell them how to rebudget their general plan, I'm not going to provide that at this point.
I think this discussion's been very helpful, but I'm still left with this kind of gnawing feeling that we're trying to outthink ourselves a little bit. We continually talk about the importance of what the marketplace is going to allow to be built there. Sometimes the marketplace does have some interesting input, and it's not like we necessarily need to make our decisions on the basis of what one particular developer wants to do or one particular landowner wants to do. But I think their input is helpful because they do study market trends, they do understand what works and what doesn't work. And if we're trying to make a plan here that we think is going to be both feasible and pleasing to the residents of the city, I really think we need to have that input. Now, when we were studying the west side, we had a committee formed. We met with the stakeholders. It didn't go the way we thought it was going to go, but the input we got from stakeholders was relatively good. And I'm not saying that we necessarily need to do a committee study on this. I don't want to slow down the process that much, but I do think that continually working with the landowners, the stakeholders, not only on the east side, but get input from the west side as well, would be helpful for us in our decision-making process, even in our formulative process. Now, while we can direct staff to say, give us some scenarios where we have a buffer park of some size and some residential and some mixed use, how do we do that? How do we craft that into some sort of an ordinance that makes sense? You know, you could come up with some alternatives for us, and maybe we ought to get started on that process, but I don't think we get very far down the road before we have to start getting input.
What I'm concerned about is that if we don't have something for people to react to, we will sit at the work session again and go nowhere.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm not trying to get to the point that we have a decision. I think these are the elements that we want to talk about and outline those points, so that when we notice the property owners and they come and speak before the mic or something of that nature, you know, our past 3 work sessions have produced no direction, no insult to anybody. It's just, what do we want? You know, what do we want?
It produced
We want.
this.
Now, if they want is a park, we'll put that on the table and put it. I think where I struggle is that it's almost as if, tell us whether we can actually get a park. And if we can, we want to pursue that. And I'm saying from my standpoint is that's beyond the capacity of a general plan amendment to get to. That's a strategic plan. That's the next level down out of the general plan. So your first look is what's the right land use pattern? And if you want to include a park in there, include that park into there, because you might find out that the strategic plan and the recommendation of a feasibility study comes and strikes that option off the table. So what's left in the general plan when that option falls off the table? And you prioritize that. And so that's what I'm willing to do. But I'm not willing to go through the process to get you to the point where you're comfortable enough to say we can win the success on the logic of putting a park here.
But on the other hand, if we say, let's look at a change to the general plan that allows for residential to go in. We start talking density, we start talking park impact fees, we start talking landscaping allocations and green space, we may end up with a park anyway. In which case, we kind of...
Yeah, you're going to end up with 3 acres of open space in a residential development.
Right.
Whether it's 4 units an acre, well, single family is different. But any multifamily, you're going to end up with 3 acres of open space. How that open space is allocated. And that's the tension of it is that's a cost to them that they've got to absorb through density.
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah, so, you know, capitalizing on that in a private-public partnership is a much more feasible idea than saying, halt that, let it deteriorate, put them in a position that they've got to reuse the buildings because the general plan is not going to the direction of their interest, and they find a way to come back with a market analysis that says indoor self-storage is feasible on this lot, and that's the zoning, that's the zoning we want. And that's why I'm thinking the public-private partnership is where I'm convinced that we can get something for the community in a development pattern on whatever you finally decide what should be developed there. But I'm honest with you, buying a 3-acre park on our city's budget is not in the cards. And so if you want it in the cards, you're talking 5, 7, 10 years down the road, and you might be willing to go that direction. That's when you probably maybe can convert and gather time, synergy, and money to develop a park. So then if that's your scenario, the plan is what do you do the interim until then that you don't create a synergy that counts you out of that 10-year plan.
But I think that's kind of what we're doing here is talking about this is what we want it to be when the time is right, right? And so we're going to say when the time is right, let's do the park. Maybe by then the city's able to reallocate RAP funds or whatever
else. Right,
that's
what I'm saying. Let's not go down the road of how we're going to pay for it. Let's go down the road that that's what you want, and then let the time horizon work out. But what happens as that process is taking place?
Right, because part of the reason why I'm going with that is if we were to try and push that now with the the public-private thing, if we were to have, we might be able to get 3 acres of park if we throw in 8 to 12 units of density, but for a lot of citizens, they would feel like we just sold our soul.
Right.
And
but that's what you're thinking about is remember your general plan is trying to vision out 20 years and trying to accomplish something in 10 years.
But we don't have to necessarily go down that road of high density to get what we want, if we can get buy-in from the stakeholders. And I'm not just talking about the developers or the owners of the east side. I think that there's a possibility we can get community support otherwise that would allow us to develop something realistic without putting an undue burden on the
Right,
developer.
and that's what I'm saying.
And we can keep the density
Yeah, so
smaller.
plan a park in which your expectations, the purpose of that park, and allow a strategic plan and a feasibility study recommendations on whenever it's fit to do that, begin to answer those questions. What I'm concerned about is it's more of, can we get it? And if we can get it, that's the direction we're going. And I just say, no, plan it. Plan it from a land use pattern. Commit to that land use pattern, and then let the strategic plans identify in the general plan language, we want a community park. We want it to be a neighborhood from 2 to 4 acres in size. We want the city to enter a strategic plan to study the facility before a different type of reuse scenario takes place. I think that's very doable language versus whether we can actually achieve a park or not.
I think that's
What we're saying.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying. I think that's precisely what we're saying. And in the meantime, we've got people out there that are kind of working behind the scenes, and we know that there's a developer out there that's very interested in this. They were here tonight. They heard our comments. I don't know if they liked them or not, but my guess is that's going to either change their view of how they're approaching this, or they're going to come up with something different that kind of matches the sentiment of the commission. So, anyway, we've spent quite a bit of time tonight. Direction for staff. I think we need to have something. I'd like to see something at our next meeting where we continue this, but I think it needs to be on a bit more of a concrete basis. Do we want to?
The question is, what do you want to prepare for the business owners and the landowners to respond to? And what's your kind of target horizon for that? I mean, I clearly hear that a park proposal is part of a scenario to talk about and for them to react to.
Right, I think so. I think that we talk about, just as you mentioned a few minutes ago, that type of thematic approach with the understanding that in order to make it work, we would need to see if we could have support from the stakeholders.
Okay.
So can we at least review that maybe at our next meeting, something that we wouldn't be presenting it to the
No. We could put an outline together. So we could put we could put some thematic ideas of the types of things that involve a park discussion in it. Do you want anything else other than that in that? I hear 6, 8, not 12.
No, I heard
Is
12.
is density another thematic element to have feedback on?
I think it certainly is.
It'll be part of the discussion for sure.
Okay.
And I, like other members of the commission, I don't know that we have to throw out the whole concept of mixed use, because we've got some businesses on the east side that are viable, and it's going to be mixed use whether we like it or not. And maybe we think about the possibility of a portion of this still retaining some commercial element or mixed use element.
So we can put a thematic element together about, interim and transition uses until longer horizon elements take place.
So I'm going to make a motion,
Please.
because that's what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do.
I move to direct staff to put together some scenarios for mixed use and scenario for park, with one being a public-private partnership up to 8 units, and then whatever in there.
Okay.
And then the other one being just park. And if you want to talk about, I don't know that you necessarily want to talk about the cemetery at that point. I think that's, we could talk about that later, but that's not really something to share with the shareholders, I think. So again, just
we can bring
mixed use, and then park with scenario 3 and 4.
would second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Three and four?
3 and 4.
Okay.
Okay, does that help?
Yes,
Corey?
yes,
Give
we
us some
can.
direction?
Now, the question is, you want to, just to make sure, clarification, not question, you want to see a proposal of the thematic elements at your next meeting so that you can set a date for inviting others to come in and have a discussion around that proposal.
Yes.
Okay.
And one question I would ask is, and you've set it out here as a public hearing with the stakeholders.
Well, the public hearing is going to come when we actually
Yeah.
draft.
Do we have a work session where we specifically invite the stakeholders to come in and discuss this with them? I mean, that's still public.
Well, yeah, it's still public. Remember your last session, they were all invited that way? And the work session makes them feel separate than addressing you.
Okay.
So I think it should be more of the diocese,
Okay.
even though that's somewhat
But
intimidating.
A special meeting or one of the regular meetings?
It's just part of your regular agenda item, is
Okay.
what we
All
would
right.
plan.
All right, I'm good setting it up.
Can I clarify on that motion? Are you not wanting a transition of residential and park included? That, because that isn't 3 and 4.
Yeah, private-public
So
partnership.
the scenario 3 is the,
Scenario 3 covers that transition.
That's mixed use.
no.
No, that's conversion in 8 units an acre.
The park
Oh,
scenarios,
okay,
not
okay. I'm looking
the
at
larger
the different
ones.
things. I'm sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
And then I was going to ask, also clarify, is anyone interested in mixed use on like maybe the parts that are still viable and then a park? I mean, or would that still be under the public-private partnership, or is no one really interested in that?
I view that as under the public-private partnership.
That's what I kind of view too. Yeah. Does that make sense, Corey?
Now it does.
So maybe there's the 2 scenarios for the park, which is 3 or 4, but within the
Right,
3 scenario, there's,
there'll be alternatives underneath.
yeah, that'd be great. Cool.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you for a very good discussion tonight on that. Let's move on to where we're at.
Sure. Just reporting to you on your next meeting. We do have some items scheduled, and we'll add this thematic element preview for you to discuss. You have the Bridge Community Church with an amended site plan for their parking, and so that'll be a conceptual review. You have the Kim Samuelson Barn. This is similar to what you saw the Blakes. They've added property to their home up into the ag area, their agricultural zone, but it's undeveloped property, so they want to put a large barn there. And so it's residential development outside of platted subdivision, but it also has hillside elements. The sensitive
By the
land.
way, in full disclosure, when Kim was working on my teeth this week, and I was
Did he lament?
partly asleep, he hit me up on this. I said, can't talk about it.
Yeah, he's a little frustrated on the length and time frame, but it comes from
Yeah.
not understanding that he's in the hillside overlay zone, and his view is it's his land, so why can't I just build an accessory building? And so,
But I promise you, I wasn't under your gas. I was just
Oh,
under
good.
local anesthesia.
gave you a little extra. So he'll bring that to you. You have if you remember the Blake, the neighbors that came with them as part of the shared access, they now wanted to build an accessory building on their portion of the property. And then we have a recent addition item. The Quick Quack wants to come back to you on whether you'll reconsider the Parish Lane Design Guidelines motion. And
They really want the yellow.
and they're making
is it for
they're
color?
making that argument to you, and we'll identify the procedures to see if you'll even do that. So there'll be those 4 items before you. And then the report for the council, the Davies rezone and the plat amendment for adding that property. Bill Davies, the agricultural that was less than a half acre, that passed as long and well with the plat amendment. And then the Moss Acres, that's the significant historic home on that large acreage, that rezone passed.
Good to know. That's the one on Main Street and
Yeah.
Yeah.
20 North, yeah.
Yeah. Chad Morris was the applicant.
Thank you, Corey, for that report. Thanks, staff, for a great job in putting this together for us tonight. Thank you all for your input. You have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.